Hey everyone, how y'all doing? I hope you're blessed with good health today and peace in your hearts. As always, we're diving into a story that's going to shake you to your core, test every ounce of your patience, and probably have you shouting at your screen. This is the story of a wife who gave everything, her money, her time, her entire future, only to be slapped with the cruelest betrayal imaginable. Picture this. For 3 long years, this woman poured every dime from her successful business into funding her husband's entire law school education. She sacrificed deals, expansion opportunities, sleepless nights, all so he could walk across that stage. But what did she get on bar admission night? Instead of gratitude, instead of love, she got divorce papers. Her husband told her with ice in his voice, "I'm embarrassed to be married to someone who clawed their way up from nothing. You're too common for the circles I'm entering now." After the divorce, the wife disappeared without a trace. But 2 years later, her ex-husband, now a hotshot corporate attorney, panicked and desperately searched for her like his life depended on it. What happened to him? Well, before we unpack this explosive story, I need y'all to show some love to the channel. If you're feeling this content, smash that like button. And so you never miss the most jaw-dropping stories we bring you, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell. While you're at it, let's do a roll call. Drop your name, your city, and the word present in the comments. I want to know where my community is watching from. Thank you all so much for being here. All right, without wasting another second, let's jump right into this story. That evening, thunderous applause echoed through the grand hall of the Georgia State Bar Association ceremony. Among the proud families and beaming guests, Zuri Pearson sat with a storm of emotion swirling inside her chest. She subtly dabbed at the corners of her eyes, refusing to let the tears fall, not yet. She looked toward the stage where her husband, Dante Morgan, stood tall in his formal suit, holding the certificate that officially made him a licensed attorney in the state of Georgia. 3 years. 3 years of waiting, of sacrifice, of unimaginable hardship had finally led to this moment. Zuri smiled, but it was a smile that felt unfamiliar on her face, stiff from years of exhaustion and worry. She glanced down at her own hands, elegant but showing the faint signs of stress. These were hands that had signed contracts at 2 a.m. after working all day, hands that had typed out business proposals while Dante slept peacefully before his exams, hands that had massaged his shoulders when he complained about the pressure of law school. Zuri had poured everything into Dante's dream. She delayed expanding Pearson Industries, turned down lucrative partnerships that required her full attention, and suppressed every personal ambition she had, all for one singular vision: to see Dante Morgan, Esquire. Sitting beside her was Dante's mother, her mother-in-law, Daphne Morgan, who wore the most triumphant expression Zuri had ever seen. "My Dante is finally an attorney," Mrs. Morgan announced to the couple sitting next to her, soaking up their congratulations like she'd personally funded every semester. Mrs. Morgan looked impeccable in a vintage Chanel suit and perfectly coiffed hair. She cast a sideways glance at Zuri, who wore a simple but elegant navy dress, tasteful, but clearly not designer. 4 years now, Mrs. Morgan hadn't hidden her disdain for Zuri, who came from new money and, in her opinion, lacked the refinement and pedigree worthy of her brilliant son. But Zuri had never cared. Dante's love was all that mattered. The ceremony ended. Dante walked toward them with a broad, confident smile, but that smile was aimed almost entirely at his mother. He embraced Mrs. Morgan tightly. "I did it, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course you did, sweetheart. Mama always knew you were destined for greatness," Mrs. Morgan replied, stroking his cheek like he was still a child. Zuri stepped closer to embrace her husband. "Congratulations, baby. I'm so proud of you." Dante accepted Zuri's hug, but there was a stiffness to it, a coldness she hadn't felt before. He quickly pulled away. Yeah, thanks. We're celebrating tonight at the Capitol Grill. I made a reservation. Let's make it special, Dante said, but his eyes didn't quite meet hers. Zuri's heart sank just a little at the distance in his voice, but she tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was just overwhelmed. Maybe the gravity of the moment was hitting him. Sure, whatever you want, honey, Zuri replied softly, forcing warmth into her tone. That night, the three of them sat at an upscale steakhouse overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline. Zuri felt slightly out of place despite running a multi-million-dollar company. Something about the performative elegance of the setting felt hollow. She noticed Dante had changed into an expensive-looking tailored shirt she'd never seen before, and he sat with a kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. Mrs. Morgan couldn't stop snapping photos of Dante, posting them to her social media with captions about legacy and excellence. Baby, all our hard work is finally paying off. Now we can start the life we've been dreaming about, Zuri said gently, trying to spark some warmth between them. Hearing that, Mrs. Morgan let out a sharp, derisive laugh. Dante's hard work, you mean, Zuri? My son worked his fingers to the bone. He's an attorney now. Of course his life is going to change. He deserves the absolute best. Zuri fell silent, stung by the comment. She waited, hoped for Dante to correct his mother, to acknowledge that it had been a partnership, a team effort. But Dante said nothing. He was too busy examining the wine list like it was a legal brief. After they ordered, there was a strange, heavy silence at the table. Dante cleared his throat and finally looked at Zuri. This time, his gaze was unreadable, cold, detached, like he was looking at a stranger. Zuri, I need to tell you something, Dante said. Yes, baby. Zuri replied, her heart starting to race for reasons she couldn't explain. Dante reached into his leather briefcase, new, expensive, and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He placed it on the table directly in front of her. Zuri frowned. What's this, honey? A job offer from one of those big firms. Mrs. Morgan, sitting beside Dante, smiled, a slow, smug smile that made Zuri's stomach drop. Dante shook his head slightly. No. Open it. Zuri's hands trembled as she reached for the envelope. She slowly pulled out the document inside, her eyes scanning the first few lines. The elegant restaurant seemed to tilt sideways. The clinking of silverware from nearby tables faded into silence. The laughter and conversation around her became white noise. There, in bold, official lettering, were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." Zuri looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief, searching Dante's face for some sign that this was a cruel joke. Dante, this is a joke, right? What kind of sick joke is this? Today is supposed to be a celebration. Dante sighed deeply, his face hardening into something unrecognizable, cold, clinical, like he was delivering bad news to a client. I'm serious, Zuri. This isn't working anymore. We can't be together. But why? What did I do wrong, baby? For 3 years, Zuri's voice cracked, her throat tightening. Because of that, Dante interrupted sharply. 3 years is enough. I'm a lawyer now. I have a future in corporate law. I need a partner who fits that world. Someone I can bring to firm galas and client dinners. Someone who has legacy, refinement. Dante looked Zuri up and down, assessing her simple dress, her minimal jewelry, her face bare of the dramatic makeup the other wives wore. Zuri, we're not on the same level anymore, Dante said, the words falling from his mouth like they meant nothing. I'm embarrassed to be married to someone who built their wealth from the ground up. You're too common for where I'm going. It was like being struck by lightning on a clear day. Zuri's mind went blank. Those words, common, embarrassed, came from the man she had financially carried, emotionally supported, and believed in when no one else did. Mrs. Morgan leaned forward, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Did you hear him, Zuri? Dante has standards now. You should have known from the beginning that you were out of your depth. It's better you two separate now before you embarrass him in front of his colleagues. Consider the money you spent on him a charitable donation." The tears Zuri had been desperately holding back finally broke free, not just a single tear, but a flood. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal, it all shattered her in that moment. She looked at Dante, searching for any trace of the man who'd once held her and promised forever, but all she saw was a stranger wearing his face. She looked at Mrs. Morgan, who was practically glowing with victory. Zuri bit down hard on her lip, trying to suppress the sob threatening to escape. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her break down publicly. With violently trembling hands, she crumpled the divorce papers in her fist. The word charitable donation echoed in her mind like gasoline thrown on a fire. Something inside Zuri broke, but it didn't shatter. The moment it broke, it transformed into something else entirely, cold, sharp steel. The tears stopped. Instantly. She slowly lifted her head and looked at the two people sitting across from her. Her gaze, which had been full of confusion and pain just seconds ago, was now ice-cold, expressionless, unreadable. She wiped the remaining tears from her face, not with the soft gesture of a broken woman, but with the firm, decisive movement of someone who had just made a life-changing decision. Dante and Mrs. Morgan were visibly surprised by the sudden shift. They'd expected her to cry, to beg, maybe even to faint. But instead, Zuri went terrifyingly silent. Enough. That single word came from Zuri's lips, low, hoarse, but filled with power. "Mrs. Morgan," Zuri said, her voice steady now, "I said enough." She locked eyes with her mother-in-law, who suddenly looked uncertain. "You told me to know my place. You said my sacrifices were just charity. You said I would embarrass him." Zuri let out a small bitter laugh, a sound more chilling than any scream. "Did you think I would just sit here and let you trample on me like this?" She turned to Dante, who now looked tense, uncomfortable. "And you, Mr. Morgan." The way she emphasized Mr. was pure mockery. "You say you've become an attorney. You say that degree is yours. You're very, very wrong." Zuri slowly stood from her chair. Her movements were calm, controlled, but charged with barely contained fury. Her hand, the same hand that had just crumpled the divorce papers, now pointed directly at Dante's face, which was beginning to pale. "That degree is mine, too." Zuri's voice suddenly rose, sharp and commanding. It startled both Dante and Mrs. Morgan, and even caused diners at nearby tables to turn and stare. Zuri didn't care. "Every single dollar that got you to that stage tonight came from my sweat," she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "Every casebook you bought was funded by a deal I closed. Every night you slept soundly before an exam, I was awake until 3 a.m. managing crises at Pearson Industries." She jabbed her finger toward Dante's chest. "You didn't just borrow my money, Dante. You borrowed my time, my energy, my entire life for 3 years to buy that law degree." Her chest rose and fell with emotion, her breathing ragged. "You said I'm not on your level." Zuri laughed again, louder this time, bitter and sharp. "You're absolutely right. I'm not on your level." She alternated her piercing gaze between Dante and Mrs. Morgan. "I will never be on the level of a coward who betrays his wife on bar admission night. And I will never be on the level of a mother who proudly supports her son's betrayal just to social climb." Zuri picked up her structured leather handbag from the chair. And remember this, both of you, she said, emphasizing every single word. You will regret this. Wounded in his pride and furious at being called out in public, Dante stood abruptly, his face flushed with shame and anger. Zuri, sit down. Don't make a scene. What do you want? Money? We don't have anything. You know every cent you had went into my education. But Zuri just smiled, a smile so cold it made Dante's blood run ice. Did you really think I was that stupid, baby? She pulled out her phone, no longer caring about the stares from the tables around them. Did you think I didn't notice your behavior changing over the last 6 months? You started hiding your phone every time I walked into a room. You started coming home late with excuses about study groups, even though your shirt smelled like someone else's perfume. Last month, I skipped buying new office furniture for Pearson Industries to cover your final tuition payment, and suddenly, you had money for a designer briefcase and that watch on your wrist. Dante's face went white. He had no idea Zuri had been watching, noticing, documenting. Zuri tapped a speed dial number on her phone. Attorney Holloway? Hi, I'm sorry to call so late, but I need you to move forward with everything we discussed. Yes. Tonight. Dante's eyes widened in genuine shock. Attorney Holloway? What are you talking about? You hired a lawyer. Zuri held up one finger, silencing him as she continued speaking into the phone. Yes, that's right. The defendant has just served me with dissolution papers in a public restaurant, exactly as we anticipated. I need you to file the counterclaim first thing tomorrow morning. All the documentation is ready. She paused, listening. Perfect. I'll see you at 9 a.m. sharp. She ended the call and placed her phone deliberately on the table, her movements calm and controlled. The tears were completely gone now, replaced by something far more dangerous: clarity. What counterclaim? Dante demanded, his voice rising. Several nearby tables were now openly watching the scene unfold. Zuri, what the hell are you talking about? Mrs. Morgan's smug expression had evaporated, replaced by confusion and the first flicker of concern. Dante, what is she? I'm talking about justice, Mrs. Morgan, Zuri interrupted, her voice ice-cold. I'm talking about the $750,000 I poured into your son's legal education over 3 years. Tuition, books, bar exam prep courses, living expenses while he studied instead of working, the luxury apartment near campus so he could focus better, the new laptop, the suits for interviews, the networking dinners I couldn't even attend because I was too busy working to pay for them. She turned her gaze back to Dante, who had gone very still. Did you think I didn't keep records, Dante? I run a multi-million-dollar company. Documentation is what I do. Every bank transfer, every credit card statement, every receipt, I have it all. 3 years of financial records showing exactly how much of Pearson Industries' profits went directly into building your career. Dante's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. And do you know what's really interesting? Zuri continued, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. 6 months ago, when you started acting different, distant, secretive, cold, I hired a private investigator. Just a precaution, I told myself. I didn't want to believe my husband would betray me. But I'm a businesswoman, Dante. I trust, but I verify. She picked up her phone again and swiped through it, then turned the screen toward him. Dante's face drained of all color as he saw photograph after photograph, him with another woman at upscale bars, entering hotel rooms, shopping for expensive items Zuri had never seen. Her name is India, isn't it? Zuri asked, her tone conversational, almost pleasant. The junior associate at Whitmore and Dash, where you just accepted that position? The one from the connected family with the pedigree your mother always wanted for you. Mrs. Morgan gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Dante, is this true? But Dante wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at Zuri with a mixture of shock, fear, and something that might have been grudging respect. Zuri, I can explain. Explain what? Zuri's voice cracked like a whip. Explain how you've been planning this for months? How you used me until you got exactly what you needed, then lined up your replacement before discarding me like yesterday's newspaper. How you and your mother looked down on me, called my money dirty and common, while spending every single cent of it. She stood fully now, her 5'7" frame somehow seeming to tower over both of them. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent, all pretense of not watching abandoned. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. I gave you everything, Zuri said, and for just a moment, the hurt broke through the steel in her voice. I believed in you when you were just a kid with a dream and no way to pay for it. I sacrificed expansion opportunities that would have doubled Pearson Industries' revenue. I worked 16-hour days while you studied. I held you when you cried about the pressure. I was your partner, Dante. Your wife. Her voice hardened again. And you repaid me by cheating, lying, and planning to humiliate me the moment you didn't need me anymore. Dante finally found his voice, though it came out weak, defensive. Zuri, you're being emotional. Think about this rationally. If you file some kind of lawsuit, it's going to be messy. Public. It'll hurt both of us. My career is just starting. Your career. Zuri laughed, and it was a sound completely devoid of humor. Your career that I built? The career that exists because I funded every single step of it? You're worried about your career. She leaned forward, placing both palms flat on the table, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper that somehow carried across the silent restaurant. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Dante. Tomorrow morning, my attorney is filing a counterclaim for financial exploitation and breach of marital contract. I'm suing you for $750,000, every penny I invested in you, plus interest and compensation for opportunity costs. The lawsuit will detail every expense, every sacrifice, and every lie. It will be public record. Every law firm in Atlanta will know exactly how you built your career. Dante's face had gone from pale to gray. You can't, that's not, there's no legal precedent for. Actually, there is, Zuri cut him off smoothly. Spousal support claims, breach of fiduciary duty, fraudulent inducement. Attorney Holloway specializes in complex marital fraud cases. He's very good at his job. Almost as good as I am at mine. Mrs. Morgan finally found her voice, shrill and panicked. This is extortion. You can't force my son to pay you back for being a wife. That's what marriage is. Zuri turned to her mother-in-law with a smile that could have frozen flames. You're absolutely right, Mrs. Morgan. Marriage is about partnership, mutual support, and love. But what Dante and I had these last 3 years, that wasn't a marriage. That was an investment scheme where I was the sole investor and he was the sole beneficiary. And now that investment is being called in. She straightened up, smoothing down her simple navy dress with deliberate care. Oh, and Dante? You should call Simone. Let her know that the promising young attorney she thought she was getting comes with about $750,000 in debt and a very public lawsuit about financial exploitation. See if that pedigree family of hers still thinks you're such a catch. The transformation was complete. The crying, heartbroken wife from 10 minutes ago had been completely replaced by someone else, someone harder, sharper, absolutely unbreakable. Zuri Pearson, CEO of Pearson Industries, had entered the building. Dante stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was flushed, a mixture of shame, anger, and fear. "Zuri, be reasonable. We can talk about this privately. You don't want to do this. Think about what this will do to both of our reputations." "My reputation?" Zuri's eyebrows rose. "I'm the successful businesswoman who generously supported her husband's education, only to be betrayed. You're the lawyer who committed adultery and exploited his wife financially before abandoning her the moment he got his license. Which one of us do you think comes out of this looking worse?" She picked up her handbag and slung it over her shoulder with finality. "I'll see you in court, Mr. Morgan. And trust me, you're going to need a much better attorney than yourself." Mrs. Morgan grabbed Dante's arm, her voice desperate now. "Do something. Stop her. She can't just—" But Zuri was already walking away, her heels clicking against the marble floor with absolute confidence. She didn't look back. Not once. Behind her, she heard Dante collapse back into his chair, heard Mrs. Morgan's frantic whispered questions, heard the explosion of whispered conversations from every table in the restaurant. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool Atlanta night. Only then, standing alone on the sidewalk with the city lights glittering around her, did she let out a long, shaky breath. Her phone buzzed. A text from Attorney Holloway. "Just watched your location move. I take it the dinner didn't go well? Everything's ready for filing tomorrow. You were right about everything. I'm sorry." Zuri typed back quickly, "Don't be sorry. Be ruthless. I want every single dollar documented, every affair date cataloged, every lie exposed. He wants to play in the big leagues? Let's show him what that really means." She looked back at the restaurant one last time through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She could see Dante's silhouette, head in his hands, while Mrs. Morgan gestured frantically. For just a moment, Zuri felt the ghost of the love she'd once had for that man, the dreams they'd shared, the future they'd planned. Then she remembered the cold look in his eyes when he called her too common. The casual cruelty. The calculated betrayal. The ghost of that love evaporated like morning mist. Zuri called for her car and waited, her mind already moving to the next steps. The lawsuit was just the beginning. She had plans, big plans. Dante had made a catastrophic mistake. He'd underestimated her, dismissed her, thrown her away like she was nothing. He was about to learn that Zuri Pearson was not nothing. She was everything. And she was just getting started. 3 weeks later, Zuri sat in a sterile conference room on the 14th floor of the Fulton County Courthouse, her burgundy power suit pristine, her expression unreadable. Attorney Holloway sat to her right, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every trick in the book. Across the long mahogany table sat Dante, looking considerably less polished than he had at the bar ceremony. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the tension in his jaw. Next to him sat his attorney, Gerald Weiss, a bulldog of a man known for aggressive divorce tactics. Mrs. Morgan sat in the corner behind Dante, her designer outfit immaculate but her face drawn. She hadn't been allowed to speak during the proceedings, but her presence hung over the room like a storm cloud. The mediator, Judge Patricia Okonkwo, a no-nonsense woman with over 20 years on the bench, reviewed the documents before her with reading glasses perched on her nose. "Let me make sure I understand the claims correctly," Judge Okonkwo began, her voice measured. "Mrs. Morgan, excuse me, Mrs. Pearson Morgan, you're countersuing for $750,000 in educational expenses, opportunity costs, and damages related to financial exploitation during the marriage?" "That's correct, Your Honor," Attorney Holloway responded smoothly. Dante's attorney leaned forward. Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt at extortion. My client wishes to end an unsuccessful marriage, which is his legal right. Mrs. Pearson Morgan's contributions were made voluntarily during the marriage as a spouse. There's no legal basis to recoup standard marital support. Standard marital support? Zuri's voice cut through the room like a blade. Attorney Holloway placed a gentle hand on her arm, but she continued. I funded 100% of his legal education while he contributed nothing to our household. Nothing. I have the financial records to prove it. Judge Okonkwo raised a hand. Mrs. Pearson Morgan, please allow your attorney to speak for you. Zuri nodded curtly, but her eyes never left Dante's face. He couldn't hold her gaze. Attorney Holloway opened his briefcase and began placing documents on the table, thick stacks of them, organized with color-coded tabs. Your Honor, we have comprehensive documentation. Bank statements showing $247,000 in direct tuition payments. Credit card statements totaling $183,000 for books, bar prep courses, and educational materials. Rental agreements showing $215,000 paid for Mr. Morgan's apartment near campus, an apartment Mrs. Pearson Morgan never lived in because she maintained their marital home 45 minutes away. Additional expenses for professional wardrobe, networking events, and bar association fees totaling $105,000. He slid a separate folder across the table. We also have documentation of Mrs. Pearson Morgan's declined business opportunities during this period. 3 expansion contracts she turned down because they would have required her full attention and capital that was instead diverted to Mr. Morgan's education. Our financial analyst estimates these opportunities would have generated an additional $1.2 million in revenue over the 3-year period. Dante's attorney picked up the documents, his expression darkening as he scanned them. Your Honor, even if these numbers are accurate, and will need time to verify, this still doesn't constitute exploitation. Spouses support each other. That's the nature of marriage. It would be, Attorney Holloway said calmly, if the support were mutual. But our investigation shows that during the entire 3-year period, Mr. Morgan contributed exactly $0 to household expenses, marital savings, or joint investments. Every dollar came from Mrs. Pearson Morgan's company. Furthermore, he placed another folder on the table, and Zuri watched Dante's face go pale. We have evidence that Mr. Morgan began an extramarital affair approximately 7 months ago with one India LaCroix, a junior associate at Whitmore & Dash, where Mr. Morgan accepted employment. Cell phone records, hotel receipts, witness statements. The affair began while Mrs. Pearson Morgan was still actively funding his final semester and bar exam preparation. Mrs. Morgan made a small sound in the corner, something between a gasp and a sob. Dante closed his eyes. Your Honor, Dante's attorney said, his voice strained, my client's personal relationships. Demonstrate intent, Attorney Holloway interrupted smoothly. Mr. Morgan didn't simply fall out of love. He strategically planned his exit. He secured employment at a prestigious firm, began a relationship with a woman his mother deemed more suitable, and then served divorce papers to Mrs. Pearson Morgan on the very night of his bar admission ceremony, after she had fulfilled her usefulness. Judge Okonkwo removed her glasses and looked directly at Dante. Mr. Morgan, is this accurate? Did you begin a relationship with another woman while your wife was supporting you financially? Dante's attorney whispered something urgent in his ear, but Dante shook his head. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, Your Honor. I did. The silence in the room was deafening. Judge Okonkwo made a note on her legal pad. Mr. Weiss, what is your client prepared to offer? Dante's attorney shuffled papers, clearly recalculating his strategy. Your Honor, my client is a newly licensed attorney with significant student loan debt. He has no student loan debt, Zuri interrupted flatly. I paid for everything. He graduated debt-free while I depleted my company's expansion fund. Judge Okonkwo looked at Dante's attorney. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor, but my client's starting salary is $185,000 annually, Attorney Holloway provided, plus bonuses. We have his employment contract. Whitmore & Dash is one of the top corporate firms in the Southeast. Judge Okonkwo sat back in her chair. Mr. Morgan, you have no student debt, a six-figure salary, and you committed adultery while your wife funded your education. I'm inclined to grant Mrs. Pearson Morgan's claim in full, possibly with additional punitive damages for emotional distress. For the first time since entering the room, Zuri saw fear flash across Dante's face, real, genuine fear. $750,000 would cripple him financially for decades. He'd be paying her back until he was 50. And then something unexpected happened. Zuri felt the anger that had sustained her for 3 weeks begin to shift into something else. Not forgiveness. She would never forgive this betrayal. But something colder, cleaner. Dante, with a $750,000 judgment hanging over his head, would always be connected to her. He'd be sending her checks every month, a constant reminder of what he'd done. She'd see his name in her bank account, in her ledgers, in her life. She didn't want his money. She wanted him gone. Zuri leaned toward Attorney Holloway and whispered urgently in his ear. His eyebrows shot up, and he whispered back. She nodded firmly. Attorney Holloway cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client would like to make a statement. Judge Okonkwo gestured for Zuri to proceed. Zuri stood, smoothing down her suit jacket. She looked at Dante, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd loved, but a stranger who'd worn her husband's face while using her. I'm withdrawing the financial claim, she said clearly. The room erupted. Dante's mouth fell open. Mrs. Morgan gasped. Even Judge Okonkwo looked surprised. Zuri, what are you? Dante started. I don't want your money, Dante, Zuri continued, her voice steady and strong. I don't want a single penny of your salary for the next 20 years. I don't want monthly payments that keep you in my life, keep your name on my books, keep this betrayal alive every time I see a check. She placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward. What I want is for you to sign an unconditional divorce agreement. No alimony for either party. Clean split. You walk away with your precious degree and your new girlfriend and your mother's approval. And I walk away with something far more valuable, my dignity, my freedom, and the absolute certainty that I built everything I have on my own, without owing anything to anyone, especially not to you. Attorney Holloway slid a document across the table. We've prepared an alternative agreement. Mr. Morgan accepts full responsibility for the dissolution of the marriage, citing his adultery and abandonment. No financial claims from either party. Mrs. Pearson Morgan retains sole ownership of Pearson Industries and all associated assets, which were hers before the marriage anyway. The divorce is finalized within 30 days. Dante stared at the document like it might bite him. Zuri, I don't understand. Why would you? Because your money is dirty, Dante, Zuri said softly, but every word landed like a hammer. It's built on lies and betrayal and my sacrifice. And I don't want it. I don't want anything from you except the truth on paper, that you destroyed this marriage, not me. That you're the one who failed, not me. She straightened up, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute finality. Sign the papers, Dante. Take your degree that I paid for and build whatever life you want. But you'll do it knowing that when I walk out of this room, I'm free of you completely. No strings, no debts, no connections. And you'll spend the rest of your life knowing that I was strong enough to walk away from $750,000 just to be rid of you. Judge Okonkwo studied Zuri with something that looked like respect. Mrs. Pearson Morgan, are you certain? You have a very strong case. I'm certain, Your Honor. I don't need the court to validate what I already know, that I'm worth far more than he could ever repay. Dante's attorney grabbed the document and scanned it quickly, then whispered urgently to Dante. Finally, Dante looked up at Zuri, and for the first time, she saw something break in his expression, the realization of what he'd lost. Sign it, Mrs. Morgan said sharply from the corner. Sign it before she changes her mind. Dante picked up the pen with a shaking hand and signed his name. Zuri felt something release in her chest, not relief, not satisfaction, but completion. She was done. Your Honor, we're finished here, Attorney Holloway said. Judge Okonkwo nodded. I'll file the agreement today. You should receive your final divorce decree within 30 days. Zuri turned and walked toward the door without looking back. Just before she stepped through, Dante's voice stopped her. Zuri, I'm sorry. I really am. She paused, her hand on the doorframe. For a long moment, she considered simply walking away without responding. But then she turned, just enough so he could see her face. No, Dante. You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry that I didn't break. There's a difference. And then Zuri walked out of the courthouse into the bright Atlanta sunshine, a free woman with nothing tying her to the past and everything ahead of her. 2 years later, Dante Morgan sat in his corner office on the 23rd floor of Whitmore and Dash, staring at the Atlanta skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The view was spectacular. He could see everything from Piedmont Park to the gold dome of the state capitol. His office was decorated with expensive modern art, a handcrafted mahogany desk that cost more than most people's cars, and leather chairs imported from Italy. Everything about it screamed success. Everything about it was a lie. Dante, sweetheart, are you ready? India appeared in his doorway, immaculate as always in a cream Valentino dress, her hair swept into an elegant updo. The partners' gala starts in an hour, and you know how Mother hates when we're late. Dante forced a smile and stood, adjusting his Tom Ford tuxedo. Yeah, I'm ready. Just finishing up some documents. India crossed the office and straightened his bow tie with practiced efficiency. She was beautiful, polished, everything his mother had wanted for him. Her family had connections that went back generations. Her grandfather had been a federal judge. Her uncle sat on the board of 3 Fortune 500 companies. Her cousin was a state senator. When they walked into rooms together, people noticed. They were the golden couple of Atlanta's legal elite. Dante felt like he was suffocating. You've been distracted all week, India said, her perfectly manicured fingers lingering on his lapel. Is it the Grayson case? I heard Matthew mentioning something about complications. The Grayson case. Dante's jaw tightened involuntarily. It's fine. Just some regulatory issues we're working through. Well, don't let it consume you. Tonight is important. Father wants to introduce you to Judge Martins. He's being considered for the appellate court, and he specifically asked about you. India smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It never did. This is exactly the kind of networking that builds careers, darling. Dante nodded, gathering his briefcase. Networking. Building careers. That's what everything had become, a calculated series of connections and compromises, each one moving him further up the ladder and further from anything resembling integrity. The Grayson case was a perfect example. Grayson Industries, a chemical manufacturing company, was facing environmental violations that Dante knew were legitimate. He'd seen the internal documents showing they'd knowingly dumped toxic waste into tributaries feeding the Chattahoochee River for years. The evidence was damning. Any ethical attorney would have advised them to settle, clean up their practices, and accept responsibility. Instead, senior partner Matthew Whitmore had looked Dante dead in the eye and said, "Make it go away. I don't care how. Grayson pays us $3 million annually in retainer fees. Find the loopholes, bury them in procedural motions, tie it up in court until the plaintiffs run out of money. That's what we do here." And Dante had done exactly that. He'd found every technicality, exploited every procedural delay, buried a small non-profit environmental group in so much paperwork they'd nearly given up. He'd watched the lead attorney for the plaintiffs, a young woman fresh out of law school working for legal aid, literally cry in the courthouse hallway when he'd gotten their primary evidence thrown out on a technicality he knew was ethically dubious at best. He'd gone home that night and thrown up. But he'd won the motion. Matthew had clapped him on the back and told him he had a bright future. His annual bonus had been $85,000. India had been so proud. The drive to the gala was quiet. She scrolled through her phone, occasionally commenting on social media posts from their circle, who'd bought a new house in Buckhead, who'd made junior partner at which firm, who'd been seen at which charity event. It was all a game, Dante had learned. Everything was about appearances, about being seen in the right places with the right people, about cultivating an image of success so polished that no one ever looked beneath the surface. The gala was being held at the Georgian Terrace Hotel, a historic venue dripping with old Atlanta money and influence. Dante and India glided through the crowd, champagne glasses in hand, her fingers possessively wrapped around his arm. They smiled, they laughed at jokes that weren't funny, they made small talk about nothing that mattered. Dante. Matthew appeared, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his custom tuxedo emphasizing his still athletic frame at 62. Next to him stood his wife, Layla, a woman who'd perfected the art of looking down at people without ever changing her expression. "Glad you could make it. I want you to meet someone." Matthew steered them toward a distinguished-looking black man in his 50s. "Judge Aaron Martins, may I present Dante Morgan, one of our rising stars at Whitmore and Dash. Dante's the one who handled the Grayson environmental matter so brilliantly." Brilliantly. The word tasted like acid in Dante's mouth. Judge Martins shook his hand with a firm grip. "Ah yes, I read about that case. Quite the legal maneuvering. The environmental groups weren't happy, but it was technically sound." Technically sound meant completely unethical, but I can't prove it violated any specific rules. "Just doing my job, Your Honor," Dante heard himself say, the words automatic hollow. They talked for 20 minutes, about precedent, about upcoming cases, about the political landscape. Judge Martins was clearly auditioning Dante, considering whether he'd be a useful connection when he reached the appellate court. Everything was transactional. Everything had a price. Dante excused himself to get another drink, needing a moment alone. He stood at the bar, watching the crowd of Atlanta's legal elite network and posture, everyone playing their part in the grand theater of success. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "India sent me pictures. You both look wonderful. So proud of my successful son. This is the life you deserve." The life he deserved. Dante knocked back his whiskey and ordered another. Rough night. The bartender, a young guy probably working his way through college, gave him a knowing look. Something like that. "Well, for what it's worth, you all look miserable for rich people." The bartender grinned. No offense. Dante let out a surprised laugh, the first genuine one in weeks. None taken. You're not wrong. He thought about Zuri. He'd spent 2 years trying not to think about her, but lately, she'd been creeping into his thoughts more and more. He'd heard through the grapevine that Pearson Industries had exploded in growth, that she'd expanded into 3 new markets, that she'd started some kind of foundation. He'd seen her name in the business section of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution a few months ago, photographed at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a community center she'd funded. She'd been smiling in the photo, a real smile, the kind he remembered from early in their marriage, before everything had gone wrong. Before he'd destroyed everything. Dante, darling, there you are. India materialized beside him, her voice tight with irritation. You disappeared. The Walkers want to talk to us about their daughter's wedding. They're looking for venues, and Mom thought we might offer some suggestions. Babe, we're not even engaged, Dante said, the words coming out sharper than he'd intended. India's eyes flashed. Well, perhaps we should remedy that soon. We've been together 2 years. People are starting to ask questions. People are always asking questions, Dante replied. Yes, and it reflects poorly on both of us if we don't have answers. She lowered her voice. Dante, what is wrong with you lately? You've been distant, distracted. If this is about work stress. It's not about work, he interjected. Then what? He wanted to tell her the truth, that he felt like he was drowning, that every day he represented clients he knew were wrong and won cases that should have been lost, that every ethical compromise was carving out a piece of his soul, that he lay awake at night wondering when exactly he'd become someone he didn't recognize. That he'd traded the woman who'd actually loved him for a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty at its core. But she wouldn't understand. She'd grown up in this world, had been groomed for it since birth. To her, success meant winning, regardless of who got hurt along the way. Connections mattered more than character. Image was everything. Nothing, Dante said finally. You're right. I'm just tired. Let's go talk to the Walkers. Later that night, Dante stood in the bathroom of the penthouse apartment he could barely afford, $5, $800 a month in Midtown, because India had insisted they needed to live somewhere appropriate, and stared at himself in the mirror. His tuxedo was perfect. His hair was perfect. His life looked perfect. He opened the medicine cabinet and counted the pills. Ambien for sleep, Xanax for anxiety, antacids for the constant churning in his stomach. He'd started taking them all about 6 months ago, right around the time he'd gotten his biggest case yet, defending a pharmaceutical company that had knowingly distributed opioids to clinics they knew were pill mills. Matthew had been thrilled. The retainer was $5 million. Dante had won. The pharmaceutical company paid a small fine, pocket change for them, and continued operating exactly as before. The epidemic continued. People continued dying. And Dante had received a $120,000 bonus. His phone buzzed again. An email this time, marked urgent. He opened it, his blood running cold as he read. It was from the Georgia Bar Association. Investigation into potential ethics violations. The environmental group from the Grayson case had filed a formal complaint, alleging he'd knowingly suppressed evidence and misrepresented facts to the court. They had new documentation, a whistleblower from inside Grayson Industries who'd come forward with internal memos showing Dante had been aware of the full extent of the contamination. The email requested his appearance before the ethics committee in 3 weeks. Dante's hands started shaking. An ethics investigation could destroy everything, his career, his reputation, possibly even his license to practice law. Matthew would drop him in a heartbeat to protect the firm. India's family would distance themselves from the scandal. Everything he'd built, everything he'd sacrificed Zuri for, could come crashing down. He sank onto the edge of the bathtub, the cold tile pressing against his back, and let his head fall into his hands. For the first time in 2 years, Dante allowed himself to fully feel the weight of what he'd done, what he'd become. He'd thought he was climbing up, but he'd been falling the entire time, and he was about to hit bottom. The hammer fell on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the ethics investigation began. Dante sat in a sterile conference room at the Georgia Bar Association headquarters, his attorney beside him. Ironically, he'd had to hire outside counsel since Whitmore and Dash had immediately suspended him pending the investigation's outcome. Matthew had delivered the news himself, his face carefully neutral, all traces of mentorship and camaraderie evaporated. "You understand, Dante. We have to protect the firm's reputation." Across the table sat 3 members of the State Disciplinary Board, their expressions grim. Between them lay stacks of documents, email printouts, recorded phone conversations. The whistleblower from Grayson Industries had been thorough, devastatingly so. "Mr. Morgan," began Patricia Vance, the board chair, a severe woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair. "We've reviewed all the evidence submitted by the complainants. The internal Grayson Industries memos clearly show you were made aware of the full scope of the environmental contamination. Over 40,000 gallons of industrial waste dumped directly into protected waterways over a 3-year period." She slid a document across the table. "This email, dated 14 months ago, shows a Grayson executive explicitly detailing the contamination to you and asking how to manage the exposure. Your response was to advise burying the evidence in procedural motions and discrediting the environmental group's experts." Dante's throat felt like sandpaper. "I was representing my client's interests." "You were suborning perjury and suppressing material evidence," Vance interrupted sharply. "That goes far beyond zealous advocacy. You crossed the line from representation into active participation in fraud." His attorney, Richard Bowen, cleared his throat. "The evidence is circumstantial. My client's advice fell within the bounds of aggressive defense." "Mr. Bowen, we also have testimony from 2 paralegals at Whitmore and Dash who came forward after the investigation began." Vance opened another folder. "They state that Mr. Morgan explicitly instructed them to lose certain documents during discovery and coached a witness to change their testimony. That's not aggressive defense. That's criminal conduct." The room tilted. Dante gripped the edge of the table. "Those paralegals are lying. They're trying to save their own careers. They passed polygraph examinations. Both of them." Vance leaned forward. "Mr. Morgan, this board is prepared to recommend your disbarment to the Supreme Court of Georgia. However, that's not your only problem." She nodded to the man beside her, Christian Wu, a former prosecutor with a reputation for being relentless. "The environmental group you buried in procedural motions?" Wu said, his voice cold. "They filed a civil malpractice suit against you personally. Not against Whitmore and Dash, against you. They're alleging that your actions caused them to lose their case wrongfully, resulting in continued contamination that has now affected over 200 families. They're suing for $2.3 million in damages." The number hit Dante like a physical blow. $2.3 million. He didn't have $2.3 million. His apartment ate most of his salary. India's lifestyle consumed the rest. He had maybe $40,000 in savings. "That's insane," his attorney said. "A malpractice claim requires proof of damages directly caused by—" "They have it," Wu interrupted. "Medical records showing children with elevated lead levels, contaminated wells, property values that have plummeted. They have expert testimony linking all of it directly to the continued dumping that occurred because Mr. Morgan helped Grayson avoid accountability. And they have your emails showing you knew exactly what you were doing. Dante felt bile rising in his throat. I need a minute. I need to. He stood abruptly and stumbled toward the bathroom, barely making it before he vomited violently into the toilet. When he finally emerged, shaking and pale, his attorney was waiting in the hallway. Dante, we need to talk settlement, Bowen said quietly. The board is offering a deal. If you voluntarily surrender your license and agree to never practice law in Georgia again, they'll recommend against criminal prosecution. And if we can negotiate the malpractice suit down, maybe offer a payment plan. I can't pay $2.3 million. I don't have it. Then you'll file for bankruptcy. But Dante, listen to me. If this goes to trial, if the board recommends criminal charges, you could be looking at prison time. Fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. We're talking federal charges. Prison. The word echoed in Dante's mind. He'd gone to law school to help people, to make a difference. How had he ended up here? He knew how. He'd made a choice 2 years ago, to value status over integrity, to chase a life that looked successful over one that actually meant something. And he'd been making that same choice every day since. The next week was a blur of nightmare meetings. Whitmore and Dash formally terminated his employment. India's father called and suggested that perhaps Dante and India should take some time apart until the scandal died down. India had delivered that news over brunch at a cafe in Buckhead, her face carefully composed, her voice businesslike. You understand, darling. Dad's firm does business with half the companies in this city. We can't be associated with this kind of publicity. We've been together for 2 years, Simone. Yes, and it's been lovely. But this is beyond what I signed up for. She'd stood, smoothing her dress. I'll have someone collect my things from the apartment this week. Please be out by the end of the month. The lease is in my name. She'd kissed his cheek and walked away without looking back. His mother had been worse. When he'd called to tell her about the investigation, there had been a long, terrible silence. How could you be so careless? She'd finally said, her voice icy with disappointment. After everything we sacrificed, everything we worked for, you throw it all away for what? You should have been smarter, Dante. You should have covered your tracks better. Not you should have been ethical. Not you should have done the right thing. Just, you should have been smarter. She hadn't called him since. Now Dante sat alone in the empty penthouse. Simone had indeed sent movers for her things, leaving the space oddly hollow, surrounded by legal documents and financial statements that painted a picture of utter ruin. His lawyer estimated the malpractice settlement, even if negotiated down, would be at least $1.8 million. He had no job, no prospects, and his name was now toxic in Atlanta's legal community. The ethics board hearing was scheduled for next week, where they would formally recommend his disbarment. He'd lost everything. The career, the relationship, the life he betrayed Zuri to build, all of it was gone. Dante pulled out his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for 2 years. He searched for Zuri's name. The results were overwhelming. Articles about Pearson Industries' expansion. A feature in Atlanta magazine about successful women entrepreneurs. And then he saw it, a recent piece in the Georgia Legal Review about a new initiative. Pearson Legal Defense Foundation launches major criminal justice reform program, the headline read. He clicked through, his hands trembling as he read. Zuri had started a foundation dedicated to providing legal defense for people who couldn't afford adequate representation. The article detailed her commitment to fighting wrongful convictions, supporting public defenders, and reforming the criminal justice system. She'd built something meaningful. Something that actually helped people. While he'd been drowning in his gilded cage, she'd been changing the world. There was a quote from her at the end: "Too many people slip through the cracks because they can't afford the legal help they deserve. Justice shouldn't be for sale. It should be for everyone." Dante closed his laptop and dropped his head into his hands. The irony was crushing. He needed legal help he couldn't afford. He was about to slip through the cracks of the same system he'd spent 2 years manipulating. And the only person in the world who might be able to help him was the woman whose life he'd destroyed. Dante stared at his phone for 20 minutes before finally opening his contacts. The name he was looking for was still there, buried in the seas where he'd filed it away and tried to forget: Cameron Hughes. Pearson Industries executive assistant. Cameron had been Zuri's right hand during their marriage, a sharp young man fresh out of business school who'd helped manage her schedule and coordinate her endless meetings. Dante had barely acknowledged his existence back then, too focused on his own studies to pay attention to the people who kept Zuri's empire running. Now Cameron might be his only connection to the woman he'd thrown away. His finger hovered over the call button. Pride screamed at him to stop, to find another way, to do anything except grovel to his ex-wife's employee. But pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Pride didn't pay $1.8 million settlements. Pride didn't keep him out of prison. He pressed call. The phone rang 4 times. Dante was about to hang up when a familiar voice answered, cautious and professional. Cameron Hughes. Cameron, it's Dante. Dante Morgan. Silence. Then, cold as winter, I know who you are. What do you want? Dante closed his eyes. He deserved that tone. He deserved worse. I need to reach Zuri. I know you probably still work with her, or at least know how to contact her. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't. Absolutely not. Cameron's voice was sharp, protective. Do you have any idea what you put her through? I watched her rebuild herself from scratch after you destroyed her. I'm not giving you access to her so you can. I'm not trying to hurt her, Dante interrupted, hating how desperate he sounded. Cameron, I'm in serious trouble. Legal trouble. I'm being disbarred, I'm facing a massive lawsuit, and I've run out of options. I know how that sounds. I know I have no right to ask. But I saw the article about the Pearson Legal Defense Foundation, and I thought maybe. You thought maybe the woman you cheated on, humiliated and divorced on the night of your bar admission would save you? Cameron let out a bitter laugh. You've got some nerve, I'll give you that. I know. Dante's voice cracked. I know I don't deserve her help. I know what I did was unforgivable. But Cameron, I'm desperate. The Georgia bar is recommending disbarment. I'm being sued for $2.3 million for legal malpractice. Everything I built is gone, and I can't afford the kind of legal defense I need. Zuri's foundation, it helps people in exactly my situation. People who deserve help, Cameron shot back. People who were wrongfully accused or couldn't afford representation through no fault of their own. You're facing consequences for your own unethical behavior. That's not injustice, Dante. That's karma. The words hit like physical blows, but they were true. Every single one. You're right, Dante said quietly. You're absolutely right. I made choices, terrible choices. I compromised my ethics, I betrayed people who trusted me, and I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I deserve everything that's coming to me. He took a shaky breath. But Cameron, if there's even the smallest chance that Zuri would hear me out, I'm begging you. Please. Just give her my message. Tell her I called. Tell her I need help. If she says no, I'll accept it and never contact either of you again. But please just ask her." Another long silence. Dante could hear Cameron breathing, could almost feel him weighing the decision. "Why should I?" Cameron finally asked, his voice softer but still guarded. "Give me one good reason why I should take this to her when I know it'll just bring up painful memories." Dante thought about lying, about crafting some manipulative appeal. But he was done with lies. Lies had brought him here. "Because she's a better person than I ever was," he said honestly. "Because she built something that helps people, even people who don't deserve it. And because—" He swallowed hard. "Because maybe she needs to see what happened to me. Maybe she needs to know that everything I thought I wanted turned to dust. Maybe that gives her some closure." Cameron was quiet for so long that Dante thought he'd hung up. "I'm not promising anything," Cameron finally said, "but I'll pass along your message. That's all I can do. If she wants to contact you, she will. If she doesn't, you never call this number again. Understood?" "Understood. Thank you, Cameron. Truly." "Don't thank me yet. You don't know what Zuri's going to say." The line went dead. Dante set his phone down on the coffee table and stared at it like it might explode. He had no idea if Cameron would actually deliver the message or if Zuri would respond even if he did. For all he knew, she'd laugh and delete the message without a second thought. He wouldn't blame her. 3 days passed with no response. 3 days of Dante jumping every time his phone buzzed, only to find spam calls or messages from his attorney asking about payment schedules he couldn't afford. His disbarment hearing was in 4 days. The malpractice settlement negotiation was in 6. The walls were closing in. On the 4th day, his phone rang from an unknown number with an Atlanta area code. Dante answered before the second ring. "Hello, Mr. Morgan." An unfamiliar woman's voice, professional and crisp. "This is Lanae Foster, Executive Director of the Pearson Legal Defense Foundation. Ms. Pearson received your message. She's willing to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. at our downtown offices. Do you know the address?" Dante's heart hammered against his ribs. Yes, I can find it." "Excellent. Please arrive on time. Ms. Pearson has a very busy schedule." There was a pause, and when Lanae spoke again, her voice carried a warning. "Mr. Morgan, I should tell you, Ms. Pearson is extending this meeting as a professional courtesy, nothing more. Come prepared to make your case, and come with realistic expectations." "I understand. Thank you. Please tell her thank you." "You can tell her yourself tomorrow. Goodbye, Mr. Morgan." The line went dead. Dante sat in his empty apartment, holding his phone, trying to process what had just happened. Zuri had agreed to see him. After everything he'd done, after 2 years of silence, she was willing to sit across from him and listen. He didn't know whether to feel hope or terror. Probably both. He had one chance to convince the woman he betrayed that he was worth saving. One chance to face the consequences of his choices and somehow find redemption. Tomorrow, he would walk into Zuri Pearson's world and beg for mercy. And he had absolutely no idea what he would say. The Pearson Legal Defense Foundation occupied 3 floors of a gleaming building in downtown Atlanta, just blocks from the courthouse where Dante's career had effectively ended. He stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the burnished steel lettering above the entrance, feeling smaller than he had in years. Through the glass doors, he could see a bustling lobby, attorneys in sharp suits conferring with clients, paralegals rushing past with file boxes, a reception area that looked more like a high-end law firm than a nonprofit. The walls were covered with framed newspaper articles chronicling cases the Foundation had won, photographs of grateful clients, and a massive mission statement etched in bronze. Justice is not a privilege. It is a right. Dante pushed through the doors, and the receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, looked up with a professional smile that dimmed slightly when he gave his name. Mr. Morgan. Yes, Ms. Pearson is expecting you. 3rd floor, corner office. Elevators are to your right. The elevator ride felt like ascending to judgment. When the doors opened, Dante stepped into a space that radiated purposeful elegance. More case files, more success stories, more evidence of everything Zuri had built while he'd been compromising himself into oblivion. A woman in her 30s with warm brown skin and an efficient demeanor approached him. Mr. Morgan? I'm Lene Foster, Executive Director. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with photographs, Zuri at ribbon cuttings, Zuri shaking hands with exonerated clients, Zuri testifying before the state legislature. In every image, she looked powerful, purposeful, alive. Everything he'd lost. Lene stopped at a heavy wooden door. Ms. Pearson will see you now. I should mention, we handle approximately 50 cases per year. We receive over 3,000 applications. We're very selective about who we help. The subtext was clear: you don't belong here. She knocked once and opened the door. And there, behind a massive desk with the Atlanta skyline framing her like a portrait, sat Zuri Pearson. Zuri looked different. That was Dante's first thought as he stepped into her office, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. She'd always been beautiful, but there was something else now, a kind of gravitational pull, an authority that seemed to emanate from her very presence. Her hair was styled in elegant natural curls that framed her face, and she wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than his current monthly rent. Diamond studs glinted at her ears, real ones he could tell, not the modest jewelry she'd worn during their marriage when every penny had gone to his education. She didn't stand when he entered, didn't smile, simply gestured to the chair across from her desk with one perfectly manicured hand. Sit. It wasn't a request. Dante sat, suddenly aware of how shabby he must look in comparison. His suit was 2 years old and showing wear, his face drawn from weeks of sleepless nights, his whole demeanor that of a man who'd been broken down and reassembled wrong. Zuri studied him with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, she spoke. You look terrible. I feel terrible, Dante admitted. There was no point in pretending otherwise. Good. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Lene tells me you're facing disbarment and a $2.3 million malpractice judgment. She also forwarded me the Ethics Board's report. I read it last night. All 47 pages. Dante's stomach clenched. Zuri, I'm not finished. Her voice was sharp as a blade. I read about how you suppressed evidence in the Grayson environmental case. How you coached witnesses to lie. How you helped a corporation poison a community's water supply and then buried the victims in legal motions until they nearly gave up. I read the testimonies from the paralegals who watched you do it, who were too afraid to speak up because you were the golden boy at Whitmore and Dash. Each word landed like a physical blow. I also read about the pharmaceutical case. The opioid epidemic case where you defended a company that knowingly shipped pills to pill mills. Where your legal strategy directly contributed to the deaths of at least 17 people in rural Georgia. Dante felt tears burning behind his eyes. I know what I did. Do you? Zuri leaned forward suddenly, her eyes blazing. Do you really, Dante? Because I'm not sure you do. I think you know you got caught. I think you know you're facing consequences. But I don't think you've actually reckoned with the human cost of your choices. I have, he said, his voice breaking. Every night, I lie awake thinking about it. The people I hurt. The damage I caused. The lives I save it. Zuri held up a hand. I don't need your guilt. Guilt is cheap. It's what people feel when they're caught, not when they're actually sorry. She stood and walked to the window, her silhouette framed against the Atlanta skyline. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the city below. Do you know why I started this foundation, Dante? To help people who can't afford legal defense. That's what I tell the press. She turned to face him, and there was something raw in her expression now, something beneath the polished exterior. The truth is, I started it because of you. Because while you were selling your soul to defend corporations that poison communities and pharmaceutical companies that fuel epidemics, I kept thinking about all those people on the other side. The ones who couldn't afford attorneys like you. The ones who got steamrolled by the system because they didn't have money or connections or power. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. I thought about that young legal aid attorney you buried in the Grayson case. The one fresh out of law school, trying her best with no resources, going up against a machine designed to crush her. And I thought, what if someone gave her the resources she needed? What if someone leveled the playing field? Dante felt something crack open in his chest. So I built this, Zuri continued, gesturing around her office. I built an organization that gives people like her a fighting chance. We take on cases that other firms won't touch because there's no money in it. We represent people who've been railroaded by prosecutors or betrayed by their own attorneys. We fight for justice, not billable hours. She walked back to her desk but didn't sit. And now you're here, asking me to use the organization I built as a response to your corruption to save you from the consequences of that corruption. Do you understand how that feels to me? Like I'm spitting on everything you've built, Dante said quietly. Like I'm asking you to compromise your principles to help someone who represents everything you fight against. Exactly. Zuri sat down slowly. So tell me, Dante, why should I help you? And don't tell me about your financial situation or your legal problems. Tell me why you, specifically, deserve the resources of this foundation. Dante opened his mouth, then closed it. He'd prepared a whole speech on the drive over, about rehabilitation, about second chances, about how everyone deserves legal representation regardless of their mistakes. But sitting here, facing the woman he betrayed, watching her defend the principles he'd abandoned, all those practiced words felt hollow. I don't deserve it, he said finally. I don't deserve your help or your foundation's resources. You're right about everything. I sold out. I chose money and status over integrity. I became exactly the kind of attorney who destroys lives and calls it zealous advocacy. I hurt people, Zuri. Real people with real lives. And I did it knowingly. He forced himself to meet her eyes. But here's what I realized, sitting in that ethics hearing, watching my entire career implode. The system is designed to create attorneys like me. Law school teaches us to think like this, to find loopholes, to win at all costs, to separate the law from justice like they're not supposed to be the same thing. And firms like Whitmore and Dash reward us for it. They give us corner offices and big bonuses and tell us we're successful while we're actually just weapons. Expensive weapons that rich people use to avoid accountability. Zuri's expression was unreadable, but she was listening. I don't deserve your help, Dante repeated. But maybe I deserve a chance to do better. To actually use my legal training the way I thought I would when I first decided to go to law school. Before I got twisted up in status and ambition and forgot why I wanted to be a lawyer in the first place. And why was that? Zuri asked. Why did you want to be a lawyer? Dante thought back, reaching for a memory that felt like it belonged to someone else. My uncle got railroaded by the system when I was 15. Public defender who barely looked at his case, prosecutor who pushed for maximum sentencing, jury that made up their minds before the trial started. He did 8 years for something he didn't do. And I remember thinking, if he just had a real attorney, someone who actually fought for him, maybe things would have been different. So you became exactly the kind of attorney who would have been fighting against him. Yeah. Dante's voice was hollow. I did. Zuri was quiet for a long time, her fingers drumming softly on the desk. Finally, she opened a drawer and pulled out a folder, thick, official-looking. I had my team research your case, she said. The ethics violations are serious, but the malpractice claim is the real problem. $2.3 million, possibly reduced to $1.8 million in settlement negotiations. You can't pay it. Bankruptcy won't discharge it completely. It'll follow you for decades. I know. The Pearson Legal Defense Foundation could fund your defense and settlement, Zuri continued, her tone businesslike now. We have the resources. We have attorneys who specialize in exactly this kind of case. We could make this go away. Hope flickered in Dante's chest for the first time in weeks. Zuri, I'm not finished. She slid the folder across the desk to him. Open it. Dante opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a contract, a thick, legally dense document with tabs and highlighted sections. He began reading, his eyes widening with each paragraph. This is a 25-year employment contract, Zuri said, her voice calm and absolutely certain. The Pearson Legal Defense Foundation will cover your entire legal defense, pay your settlement, and provide you with ongoing employment as a public defender. You'll work in underserved rural communities across the Southeast, places that are desperate for attorneys and can't afford to be choosy about their backgrounds. Dante kept reading, his heart pounding. Your salary will be $52,000 annually, enough to live on, not enough to live well. You'll be assigned to rural public defender offices in places like Valdosta, Georgia, or Selma, Alabama, or Clarksdale, Mississippi. Small towns where defendants face 200 caseloads and overworked attorneys. Places where real people need someone to actually fight for them. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You'll work for the foundation for 25 years, Dante. 25 years defending people who can't afford attorneys. People who are facing the exact same system that chewed you up and spit you out. People who need someone who understands how the machine works because he used to be part of it. Dante's hands shook as he turned the pages. It was all there, the terms, the assignments, the salary, the restrictions. He couldn't take corporate clients. Couldn't return to private practice. Couldn't leverage this experience into some future high-paying position. 25 years of his life, locked into public service. If you break the contract, Zuri continued, you immediately owe the full amount of the settlement plus legal fees. You'll be right back where you started, except older and more unemployable. This is a binding commitment, Dante. This is the rest of your professional life. He looked up at her, trying to read her expression. Why are you doing this? Zuri replied him softly, because you were right about one thing. Everyone deserves a second chance. But second chances aren't free. You want redemption? You're going to work for it. You're going to spend the next 25 years of your life fighting for people who got crushed by attorneys like the one you used to be. You're going to learn what justice actually means, not as a theoretical concept in a law review article, but as something real that affects real human beings. She stood, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of him. You destroyed lives to build your career, Dante. Now you're going to spend decades rebuilding other people's lives to earn your redemption. That's the deal. That's the only deal. Dante stared at the contract, his vision blurring. 25 years. He'd be in his 50s by the time this ended. He'd spend the prime of his career in small southern towns, defending people for poverty-level wages, living a life about as far from his Whitmore and Dash ambitions as possible. It was everything he'd never wanted. It was also the only path forward that meant anything. If I sign this, he said slowly, I can't ever come back to this world. The corporate firms, the networking galas, the corruption. Zuri cut in. The ethical compromises? The casual destruction of people's lives for billable hours? No, Dante. You can't come back to that. That's the point. He looked up at her, this woman he'd thrown away, this woman who'd built an empire while he'd been selling his soul. You could have just said no. You could have turned me away and let me face this alone. Why didn't you? Zuri's expression softened slightly, not forgiveness, but something closer to understanding. Because 2 years ago, you made a choice that destroyed our marriage but freed me to become this. And maybe the universe works in strange ways. Maybe you need to lose everything you thought you wanted to find out what you actually need. She walked to the window again, her back to him. I won't lie and say I've forgiven you, Dante. I haven't. What you did still hurts. But I've built something bigger than my pain. And if I can take the person who represents everything wrong with our legal system and turn him into someone who actually helps people, that feels like justice. Real justice. Dante looked down at the contract one more time. The salary was barely more than poverty level. The locations were places he'd never considered living. The work would be brutal, thankless, endless. He'd be giving up any chance at wealth, prestige, or comfort. But he'd be helping people. Real people. People like his uncle, who deserved better and never got it. He picked up the pen. Where do I sign? Zuri turned from the window, and for the first time since he'd entered her office, she smiled, small, controlled, but genuine. Every page that's tabbed. Initial each clause. Full signature on the last page. Dante began signing, his hand steady despite everything. With each signature, he felt the weight of his old life falling away, the ambitions, the compromises, the person he'd become. By the time he signed the final page, he felt oddly lighter. Zuri took the contract, examined it carefully, then placed it in her desk. Lene will coordinate everything, the legal defense, the settlement negotiations, your first assignment. You start in 6 weeks at a public defender's office in Thomasville, Georgia. Population 18,000. They're drowning in cases and desperate for help. Thank you, Dante said, his voice rough with emotion. Zuri, I know I don't deserve. You're right. You don't. Her voice was firm but not unkind. But maybe after 25 years you will. Maybe that's what redemption actually looks like, not a moment of forgiveness, but decades of work to earn it. She walked him to the door, and as he was about to leave, she spoke one more time. Dante, don't waste this. Don't treat it like penance or punishment. Actually help those people. Actually be the attorney you should have been all along. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. As he rode the elevator down, past the photographs of lives changed and injustices corrected, Dante felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not ambition, not hunger for status or wealth, but actual purpose. He'd lost everything: his career, his relationship, his reputation, his dreams. And somehow, in losing it all, he'd finally found the chance to become who he was supposed to be. 6 months later, Zuri stood in the small public defender's office in Thomasville, watching through the window as Dante consulted with a client, a young man facing drug charges he probably didn't deserve, represented by an attorney who was finally fighting for the right side. Lene appeared beside her. "How's he doing?" According to the supervising attorney, he's tireless. Works 16-hour days. Takes every case seriously. Actually cares. Zuri's lips curved slightly. Apparently he won an impossible motion last week, got evidence thrown out that should never have been collected in the first place. The client cried. Redemption looks good on him. Maybe. Zuri turned from the window. Or maybe he's finally just being who he should have been all along. As they walked back to the car, Zuri pulled out her phone and saw dozens of messages from people asking for help, telling their stories, sharing their struggles with a system that had failed them. She'd built something that mattered. Something real. And the man who'd broken her heart had become, against all odds, part of that mission. Justice, she thought, really did work in mysterious ways. Permit me to ask you something important. If you believe loyalty and sacrifice should be honored, and not exploited, hit that subscribe button right now. Because only people like Dante and Mrs. Morgan, the users, the manipulators, the ones who take everything and give nothing back, would watch a story like this and not stand up for what's right. Don't be like Dante, who thought he could use people and discard them when they were no longer useful. Don't be like Mrs. Morgan, who valued status over integrity and encouraged her son to betray the woman who sacrificed everything for him. Subscribe if you believe people who give everything deserve respect, not betrayal. And if you can't stand people who climb over others to get ahead, people who mistake pedigree for character and money for worth, then drop a comment right now saying, "I stand with Zuri." Let me know you're not siding with the manipulators and users of this world. Let me know you believe in justice, in dignity, in people getting what they actually deserve, not what they think they're entitled to. Hit like if you believe sacrifice should be honored, not exploited. Comment justice over status if you refuse to be like Dante. Only the Dantes and Daphnes of the world, the ones who use people and throw them away, would scroll past without engaging. Don't be like them. Stand for something. Because in the end, we all have a choice: to be like Zuri, who built something meaningful from her pain, or like Dante, who sold his soul for a corner office and lost everything that mattered. Which one are you?